The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "Stop judging that you may not be judged. For as you judge, so will you be judged. And the measure with which you measure will be measured out to you. Why do you notice the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the wooden beam in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me remove that splinter from your eye,' while the wooden beam is in your eye? You hypocrite, remove the wooden beam from your eye first. Then you will see clearly to remove the splinter from your brother's eye." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you. It's a very often repeated gospel calling us from hypocrisy towards right judgment. We're remembering today saints who were men of notoriously good judgment. Thomas More, John Fisher, also St. Paulinus of Nola for the devotees of the other feast day today. Men who were, all three of them, in very different eras. Paulinus died in the 5th century. Thomas More and John Fisher just about 500 years ago, in the 16th century. They were all men of great education and formation, who were either born with or attained very high social standing, the highest, in fact, possible social standing, but who knew how to judge well amid the thousands of voices drawing one way or the other. They knew how to discern the truth and act in accord with it, which at the end of the day sometimes means choosing not to chop off someone else's head but letting them chop off yours. And knowing even in such a trial what to cling to. How can you say to your brother, 'Let me remove that splinter from your eye,' while the wooden beam is in your eye?" St. Augustine, when he refers to this, is usually thinking of the beam in our eye as hatred, and the splinter in the other person's eye as mere anger. There's an anger we see in other people, an irritability or an irritatedness that we see in others. Perhaps everyone in this world has a splinter in their eye. It's a challenging world. The air is full of dust and splinters. There's a lot of things that can annoy us. And it's easy for us to see other people kind of squinting. They seem to be having a difficulty in their day. And we can say, "Well, what an idiot." Shouldn't they know how to behave better? What St. Augustine sees is that anger, that splinter, can grow into a beam. From ira to odium in Latin, go from anger to hatred. And he appeals to that because he, I think like most of us, realizes that little clouds the vision more than anger does. He says that we can cultivate this splinter in our eye and make it into the beam. It wasn't just that someone walked around sticking timbers in our eyes. We have somehow let it grow. He says, you scorned, or you because you didn't think it was important, you didn't pay attention to the splinter that arose there in your eye. You went to bed with it still there, and you woke up with it still there. You cultivated it in yourself. You watered it by false suspicions. You nurtured it by believing in the words of flatterers and the words of those who spoke ill to you of your friend. You did not, by your diligence, draw the splinter out. You made it a beam. Take the beam out of your eye That is, do not hate your brother. This is not a small thing or a mere example of one of the vices. St. Augustine writes also, our life is love, and if our life is love, then hatred is death. He's thinking there of who hates his brother, has murdered his brother. To have this beam in our eye, this beam of hatred, is to, as it were, crucify the world around us. Everything we see, we're sticking on a cross, the beam. We are looking at all things in such a way as to wish them to suffer. So what should we do? To pull the beam out of our eye. This is what Pope Leo speaks of as disarmament. It's not just the reduction of nuclear weapons, though he does talk about that as well, but a deeper inner disarmament. That rather than using the presence of splinters in other people's eyes to justify my hatred of them, the beam in my own, or to compete with them, say, well, you think you have it bad, look at the splinter in my eye, mine's a beam. We feel like we've won the contest somehow of imitating the irritation of others. We should instead reflect to others not their own vice, their own difficulty, their own suffering, but the peace of God. We should be able to begin unarmed and thus to disarm them, to reflect to them what we in faith have sensed, intuited, or aware and trust and believe is the peace of God. St. Augustine's advice is, well, if you need to get a splinter out of someone's eye, Jesus, he knows, is not talking about just a physical problem here, but you've got someone who needs some help that they need some correction even, right? They're succumbing to in anger and they need something to be removed. You should first ask, whatever vice you see in them, you should ask, do I currently also have this vice in me? If the answer is yes, then you've been humbled and you're ready to help with mercy. If the answer is no, you proceed to the next question, which is, did I used to have this vice in me? Did I ever have it? And the memory of that pain that the vice caused me should also then make me merciful and gentle in approaching this person. But if the answer to that question is no, this is a vice, I suppose it's possible to imagine a vice that you yourself have never really experienced. But you at least can then land in the shared weakness of our humanity, an awareness of how easily we can be irritated. Maybe I'm not an irritable person, but there's some other thing. And that can help us to approach the person in gentleness. We have to learn, for St. Augustine, to notice the specks and splinters in the eye as they arise, to remove them before we go to bed. Let not the sun set on our anger, or it will turn out to be a giant beam in our eye the next day. Much harder to remove without, I suppose, taking the eye out and perhaps the brain with it. He knows that we need this constant diligence of correcting ourselves, seeing, as it were, our own eye, in order to help others and build up the city of God. That's also how St. Bernard speaks of it, though he is thinking of monastic life specifically. The goal of monastic life, in a little treatise he wrote called The Steps of Humility, or The Steps of Pride, where he's looking at St. Benedict's 12 steps of humility from the Rule as a model of monastic life. He sees the goal of monastic life as to discover the truth. In fact, the goal of Christian life, monastic life just being kind of a variety of practices designed to help this most intensely. The goal is to discover the truth. Christ, who says he is the truth. And so to be among the merciful, because if we are not among the merciful, belonging to them truly, we will not receive mercy. To cultivate a peace in which all can help all the others, each can help all the others to remove the splinters from the eye. The first step to knowing the truth is knowing it in myself. The first step is not knowing it in someone else. It's returning to my own heart, to my own eye, and knowing it there. To dispel illusions about the self. He senses that this is what this gospel is calling us to do by condemning hypocrisy, to draw us away from illusions we cultivate about ourselves, by which we then condemn others. St. Bernard says, the truth is to be sought first in ourselves rather than in others. By considering yourself, that is, how easily tempted you are, how inclined to sin you are. To the degree you become more gentle by this consideration of yourself, to that same degree you can approach helping others in a spirit of tenderness, which he is saying is what we are all called to be doing. He says, the big fat beam, it's a more or less literal translation of his Latin, the big fat beam in your eye is pride in your mind. Pride which, by a certain huge puffiness, is vain, not sane. Swollen, not solid. It darkens the eye of the mind and obscures the truth, such that if it takes up your mind, you will not be able to see yourself, to sense yourself as you are or as you can be in reality. But rather, you will sense the you that you love, the you that you think you are, or that you hope to be. What is pride but, as St. Augustine says, love of one's own excellence? So we can say by contrast that humility is despising one's own excellence. He's seeing, in his experience of monastic life, as St. Augustine is seeing, that the gospel demands a radical reorientation. That we step out of self-exaltation, that self-exaltation that isolates. If you imagine actually having a whole beam sticking out of your eye, it would be hard to walk around among other people without knocking them flat on the floor. To step out of that self-exaltation and step into the community of the merciful. We're called to drop this battle with the world that we are born into, and this battle with others, and to strive for peace, to seek first the kingdom of God. This difficult world is indeed throwing a lot of splinters in our eyes day by day. I sometimes feel every email I get is like another little, I have to pause for a second when it arrives. Think first, before I open it, I need a little brief surgical operation is necessary before I even start. Let us not let these irritations fester, but have the discipline to remove them, and thus to help others.